Greetings brethren, CloakingDonkey here, and on Sunday I spent a bunch of time streaming and playing Dawn of War 3. Of course the game isn't out yet, and what I played was just the open beta phase of it that you can access via Steam. So the only thing I really had access to was the multiplayer mode of the game, with a total of 3 different maps. I'm assuming there's gonna be more maps when the game is released, but whether or not there is new maps really doesn't make that much of a difference, to be honest. At least not for my first impressions. The campaign, however, was not playable in the open beta, so I really can't say much about that. But to be fair, I rarely find that the single player or campaign mode in an RTS is really enough to carry the game. An RTS game, to be properly enjoyable for me, needs to have 2 very important things. It needs to have a good skirmish mode and a good multiplayer. Now, I will definitely also have to preface this by saying that I played Dawn of War 1 and 2 and Company of Heroes 1 and 2, because I really quite adore this line of games. So if you have never played any of the other Dawn of War or Company of Hero games, then some of the things I'm going to be saying don't necessarily apply to you, but overall there are still quite a few things that even apply to just the average gamer. But definitely let us start off with my impressions toward the things that are and are not like Dawn of War 1 and 2. The base building is certainly reminiscent of Dawn of War 1, however, turrets have pretty much disappeared from the game. The orcs can still build the war towers, and they still have a very important role for the orcs, but they are still quite different from how they were in Dawn of War 1. But it does give the orcs a very basic defensive structure. And they also spawn scrap, which you can use to upgrade your orc units. The coolest thing, I would say, and very much the most reminiscent thing of Dawn of War 1, is that the races build and play very differently. The Space Marines are definitely the most standard. They have several buildings that each build another type of unit, and then you have an upgrade building that upgrades all of your units, and you can upgrade your units with equipment and all of that sort of thing, just like you would in the older Dawn of War games. And the orcs are a bit more ragtag, and while they also kind of function the same way with their buildings, they do have that war tower mechanic, and some other interesting mechanics of synergy between the different units that set them apart from the Space Marines. And the units are all individually a little bit weaker as well. The Eldar are entirely different. Their standard units are all very, very weak, and you really have to go for these specialist units to even be on par with the Space Marines and the Orcs. So the Eldar have to do a lot more skirmishing in the beginning. And so that is kind of nice. You definitely have different playstyles. Resource points all across the map can still be captured, and you can build your listening posts on top of them. The only thing that is a little bit different is that you actually have to upgrade your resource points to produce resources in the first place. If you just capture them, they really just do nothing. And upgrading them to produce resources costs you resources. And this is actually a very big deal because it plays into something I'm going to talk about later in the video. Just like in Dawn of War 1, you can also build listening posts on top of the resource points, which will reinforce them with a bit of a turret that shoots at enemies. Those are, as I said earlier, however, the only defensive structures you can build, so there are no separate turrets or bunkers or anything like that. The resources are also requisition and power, just like they have been in Dawn of War since the beginning of time. However, there are no more power generators that you can build in your base. Power you also get from upgrading resource points to generate power, which also goes into that thing that I'm going to talk about later. So now let's get to the things that are not like the old Dawn of War titles. Your units cannot retreat. There is no retreat button for your units, and to be fair, there is also no point in retreating your units because your units cannot be replenished. Sometimes there will be healing effects on the map, or you can somehow replenish them. The orcs, for example, can replenish from their trucks. But that is pretty much it. Beyond that, there is no unit replenishment. So you'd think, oh well, unit conservation suddenly doesn't matter anymore. But that's actually not the case. Unit conservation is still incredibly important. It just works in an entirely different way, where you used to, make sure that you run away with your unit when you still have 1 or 2 guys left, so they don't get entirely wiped out, and so that you can reinforce them back at the HQ. Now you have to make sure that your troops take as little damage as possible until you make your push. And that just tends to make the game very blobby indeed. meaning it is much superior to wait until you have a sizable force and then make a concerted push with that, instead of how it used to be with the older Dawn of War games, where you did a lot of skirmishing. You would build, I don't know, a unit of tactical marines and you would send them off to do some skirmishing and fighting somewhere, you know, shoot some enemies, try to capture some resource points, and if you started losing marines, you would retreat them, they would run back to your base, and then you could reinforce them with new marines and bring them back up to full strength and full health, and then send them out into battle all over again. This created a very nice battle dynamic in Dawn of War 1, where you wouldn't always just fight a big blobby battle somewhere in the middle, but you would have some skirmishing going on over here with maybe a unit of tactical marines and a dreadnought going over the flank, and then maybe over here you would have some assault marines and a land speeder because they were really fast, so they could do a nice deep strike into enemy territory, while you would push with a few tactical marine squads and maybe a hero and a predator in the center. And your enemy would have to respond to all of these attacks, and it made the game just very interesting having to really look at all of these different things on the map. This is definitely not the case in Dawn of War 3, because you cannot do unit conservation the way it used to be. It just tends to make you bunch up your stuff until you have so much, until you reach a specific critical mass, that it really doesn't matter anymore if you lose something, because you're going to do so much damage and you're going to be able to push so far into enemy territory that the losses really become irrelevant, and that is where you always want to get, which means that the game is a lot more static than the older Dawn of War games, and Company of Hero games as well, of course. It feels a lot more stop and go. One other new thing that also wasn't in Dawn of War is, of course, the hero units. There were absolutely hero units in the previous games, but they were never near as powerful as the Dawn of War 3 heroes. Some of the earlier Dawn of War 3 hero units, the ones that cost like 3 or 4 elite points, they are about as powerful as the ones from Dawn of War 1 and 2. Elite points, by the way, is another resource that you sort of just gradually accumulate over time. There are some points on the map that you can capture and then upgrade again for more cash. That will get you a few more elite points, but it really doesn't change anything that much. Now, the real problem with all of this hero system is definitely the big guys. Every single faction, Space Marine, Orcs, and Eldar have a giant hero unit. The Space Marines have an Imperial Knight, the Orcs have a Morkanaut, and the Eldar have this Wraith Titan thing. And these units are absurdly powerful, to the point that when you spawn one of these ultimate mega super units, all the other units on the battlefield become entirely irrelevant. Their damage just kind of stops mattering. I mean, sure, their damage adds to the overall damage, but most of the time, if the enemy has one of those big stompy hero units and you don't, there just isn't that much you can do against them unless you have an army and they don't. If you have a big army, you can do some spreading out and then maybe hope that you can somehow defeat it. But these big units really turn everything else on the battlefield into cannon fodder. And that really just adds to the problem of everything not being able to be replenished or repaired, which means that you just want to do more blobbing and more waiting around until you have a critical mass, until you have a big stompy monster hero unit, and then push out in a big spectacle and crush the enemy. Or get crushed by the enemy, at which point you have basically lost the game already. The speciality about the Dawn of War and the Company of Heroes games is that they were so skirmishy and that there were small battles and you had to have a lot of map oversight and you had to be able to attack on one flank and also attack on another and stop a push in the middle at the same time and, you know, try to be in as many places as you could be, because just pushing all your shit across one lane in the center would generally get you killed. This is, however, the preferred mode of attack in Dawn of War 3. And this immediately funnels into the problem I was alluring to earlier with the resources and the fact that the game is so blobby and so focused on single pushes, and that you have to buy the resources on the resource points. This game suffers from an absurd amount of snowballing. Once one side has gained the upper hand and has won a fight without losing too many of their troops, it is very likely that that side is also going to win the battle in the end. To be fair, I haven't played that many battles myself, but in the meantime I have been watching quite a few other people play Dawn of War 3 on their YouTube channels, and it is something that I constantly see. There is just really no turnarounds. It is mostly just a build-up of one side that just gets more and more and more ahead, and then they just win. And the other side is so far behind at some point that they just cannot win anymore, because they would have to expend forces to take back points, and then they have to expend resources to rebuild their resource income on those points, because, you know, every time you lose a resource point, you have to rebuild the things that actually give you the bloody resources from those things. And because you can't replenish your units, you have to constantly build new units. And because you're already behind on the resource gain, you cannot catch up, because the other side keeps making more stuff with the more resources that they have. And then even if you do make a few units and, you know, use them up and lose a ton of your shit to take over a part of the map that the enemy maybe wasn't defending so much, then you still have to invest more resources and time, because those upgrades take quite a while to build before you even gain any more resources from those points. And in the meantime, your opponent still has gotten a ton of resources extra, and most likely still has reserves somewhere that you do not. Coming back in these multiplayer matches is so absurdly difficult that at this point, where most people are still relatively new to the game, I just haven't seen it happen yet at all. And that is really bad, because that's generally where a lot of the longevity of really successful online multiplayer titles comes from. I mean, seriously, when was the last time you were interested in watching an esports tournament where something went entirely swimmingly for one team the entire game and then they won at the end? How is that interesting to watch, and how is that interesting to play for any serious amount of time? You need to have those turnaround moments to make the game interesting over a long term. It needs to be possible for the underdog to come back and smash the other guys in the face, because otherwise it's just like watching a bunch of small nerds get bullied by the big strong kids. And if the side that has the upper hand with its army size and, you know, keeps engaging and trying to kill more of your troops to keep you further and further behind, if they also get their hero unit first, well, then you are just absolutely screwed. Now, obviously, I'm making it sound a lot more simple than it is. There is definitely more to this, and I'm sure there's some kind of meta game between choosing an early unit and choosing a super unit and herdy-der, but in the end, it really doesn't change the dynamic of the game that much. The dynamic of the game is still that you blob up your army and you do concerted pushes to, you know, take out stuff with as little losses as possible, and then wait for your big-ass hero unit, which will enable you to finish off the game. And the real problem with all of this is that there is only one multiplayer mode. Now, it might very well be that there are more maps in the game. That's totally fine. I mean, right now there are 3 maps, one for 3v3, one for 2v2, and one for 1v1. And it's absolutely possible that there's more of these maps, but the problem with these maps is that the game mode that you're playing on these maps is always the same. And it is not your standard average build your base and, you know, capture control points and do all this normal RTS stuff. It is a strange kind of MOBA thing, where both teams on top of their regular buildings have a power core in their base. And to take out the power core, you first have to take out the shield generator. And once you've taken out the shield generator, you can take out the turret cannon thingy-majig. And once that's taken out, you can attack the power core. And it is really that everything about this setup reminds me so much of Heroes of the Storm, really. Really, the only time I ever really felt able to push across the map, especially in the 3v3, was when my hero units were up. And if my hero units got killed, well, then they went on a death countdown timer until they came back to life. And all my regular troops really just felt like creeps. Except that, well, I was in control of the creeps. But it really just didn't feel like an RTS game. Oh, and then there's also something that might not bother everyone playing this game, but it personally aggravates me to no end. And that is that you cannot hotkey your base or any building within your base. So to fix this, I actually had a second worker standing around in base doing basically nothing apart from building a building every now and then, just so I could hotkey him and get back to my base really easily by hitting a fucking button on my keyboard. Absolutely ridiculous and absurd that you would not have the option to do that in this game. And there's another few problems that I have with the game, such as in big battles, it is absolutely impossible to tell what is going on. There are so many effects, so many swooshy particles and all sorts of nonsense on the screen that I just can't tell what is happening. And to be fair, this would honestly not be something that I would usually complain about that much, except that in their own developer diaries, they claimed that their art style choice was because they wanted more clarity in their game. Well, if that was your goal, Relic, I'm sorry, but you utterly failed. The unit's fire animations are so pathetic that you can barely see them, especially if there's a lot of shit going on around it. It's impossible to tell who's shooting at who. And you can really only see it for the elite units or the better units that have big laser cannons and big rocket launchers and stuff like that, because then you can actually see the projectiles. But for the regular units, you have no idea where stuff is shooting, you just see it by the dropping health bars. And then throw in a couple of explosions and heroes jumping around and whirlwinding and all this other crap, and it's just really not clear at all what's going on the screen. And I really have to say, after playing this game mode 2 or 3 times, I was just so sick of it. Because it is the same thing over and over and over. It really does feel like you're playing a MOBA. And to be honest, it's not a particularly good MOBA. I mean, sure, from MOBAs I'm used to playing the same map over and over for 20 to 40 minutes. But those games are designed with that sort of idea in mind, and you can't just take that and put that in an RTS game and expect that to work. I'm sorry to say, but I think this game is utter trash. And this is exactly the same situation as with the Doom multiplayer debacle last year, where I made a video and said the Doom multiplayer beta was fucking terrible. And for the record, I turned out to be 100% correct on that, because nobody fucking plays Doom multiplayer anymore. That game is utterly dead online, and the only thing worth playing in that is the single player. And that may very well be the case for Dawn of War 3 as well. The campaign might be great, but you see, this is a full-price game and they did invest quite a lot of time into making a multiplayer mode, I suppose. So I'm really kind of expecting to be playing it in multiplayer as well, especially because, well, that's just kind of where I get my kicks out of when I play RTS. So when you only give me one multiplayer mode and it's this strange aberration of crazy MOBA integration ideas and it's shit, then that is a real problem. What you should have done is you should have put in that MOBA crap mode and then also put in a regular old RTS mode where you just build your base and you take your control points and you do some rebalancing of the units and you get rid of the stupid overpowered super units. And then you would have had a perfectly fine Dawn of War game. But no, you had to have just one game mode and quote-unquote focus on that so that it's really solid. Well, I'm sorry, you really didn't produce that at all. What you produced is a subpar multiplayer mode that really got boring after just playing it 3 times. I played it once with each of the races and then once more for the footage in the background. And the 4th time I played it, I was already bored to death of the game. What a shame this is. It could have been a great resurgence of Dawn of War. It could have been another great installment in this franchise that Relic has built with their RTS games. But no, apparently they thought it was more important to try and desperately appeal to a generation of Heroes of the Storm, League of Legends and Dota 2 players. But you know what, HOTS, LOL and Dota players? Stay in those games because they are 1,000,000 times better at what they do than this piece of crap hybrid MOBA RTS game will ever be. Thank you very much for watching my first impression of the Dawn of War 3 multiplayer beta, and if you did enjoy this video, then please consider giving it a like and also consider subscribing to my channel. And you should definitely also go and check out my live streams over at twitch.tv/CloakingDonkey, where I stream very regularly. But until then, I've been the CloakingDonkey and I'll see you in another video!